Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Eating Disorders Awareness Week 2023. Today's webinar is brought to you by Bodywhys, and it focuses on learning from the diversity of family experiences. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague, Harriet Parsons, the Bodywhys Training and Development Manager.
Thank you, Barry, and it's lovely to welcome you all to our first webinar for Eating Disorders Awareness Week 2023. So today we are talking about family experiences of supporting a person with an eating disorder and living with somebody with an eating disorder. And I'm delighted to welcome our panel, Dr. Colman Noctor, who is a psychotherapist with a special interest in eating disorders. He also writes a weekly column for the Irish Examiner and is a regular on RTE Radio 1, The Ray D'Arcy Show, and a mental health lecturer in Waterford IT. So Colman, you're really welcome, and we're delighted to have you here today.
Thanks, Harry. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks to Bodywhys and everyone for the invite. Looking forward to it.
And we also have our parents here to tell us about their experiences. So we have Ken and Maura, who are supporting a daughter with anorexia who is recovering at the moment. And later on, we're going to be hearing from Ken and Maura about their experiences and what has helped, what has been difficult. And so I look forward to hearing that. So Ken and Maura, thank you so much for coming and speaking with everybody today.
Thanks, Harry.
Okay, so we're going to start off the webinar today with the launch of our siblings animation. As you will know, on our website, we have done an animation from the father's perspective on a father realizing that his daughter has an eating disorder. And we felt that siblings' experiences are often not spoken about or neglected a little bit. So we decided that we would put together an animation trying to capture something of what we have heard from siblings over the years about their experience of having another sibling in the house who has an eating disorder. So can I ask that Maya or Barry play us it, and let's have a look.
Okay, I'll do that now.
Hi, I'm Neve. I'm in 5th class. I live in the west of Ireland with my family. Rory is my older brother. Rory and I used to do everything together, but after transition year, he stopped spending time with me. He stopped going out with his friends and spent a lot of time working out. Food wrappers were thrown around his room everywhere, and he had lots of protein stuff on his desk. I hated when Mum and Dad treated us to takeaway, because Rory would get so worried. I didn't know why this was happening. We loved takeaway night. One night, after we had pizza, I heard Rory being sick in the bathroom. I was worried, because we'd eaten the same pizza, but I wasn't sick. I said I'd get Mum, but Rory started shouting at me. Mum heard us shouting and came up to see what was happening. She was really cross with him and took away his fitness watch, which I thought was weird because he was sick. Rory got really angry and said he didn't care about the watch. He would just run more. I felt really upset. I didn't know who was right. The next few months were horrible. Rory was mean and angry. Mum and Dad were so worried about him. They kept saying Rory had to go to the doctor, but he kept saying no. I hated being at home. I was afraid to talk to Rory. All I wanted to do was stay in my room, to get away from it all. I found it hard to do my homework. I was angry and confused. I felt so alone. If Rory knew that it would make Mum and Dad happier if he took a day off exercising, why wouldn't he do that? One evening, Rory stormed out of the house after another fight. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I burst out crying. Why did he have to fight with Mum and Dad all the time? And why were they so angry with him? That's when Mum and Dad told me that Rory had an eating disorder. It meant that he was feeling bad about himself, that he was sad, and was finding life difficult. Rory had started exercising to try and make himself feel better. He was finding it hard to eat too. They said he couldn't stop exercising or else he would feel worse about himself. It all made more sense now. Eventually Rory agreed to get help. Mum brought him to a team of special doctors who help people with eating disorders. I was glad he was getting help, but things seemed to get worse. He was always tired and so moody with me. I wish the eating disorder would just go away so everything could go back to normal and I could have my brother back. Mum and Dad were upset all the time. They did a course with Bodywhys to learn how we could help Rory. I asked Mum how long it would take for Rory to get better. She said they really didn't know. The doctor explained it wasn't about Rory eating normally and not exercising so much, that he had to start feeling better about himself. That was going to take time, even with help. I felt like our lives changed when Rory got his eating disorder. Mum asked me if I would like to speak to someone. She thought it might be good for me to have someone outside of our family that I could talk to. It was called therapy. I didn't like it the first few times. It felt weird talking to a stranger about our family stuff, but after a while, I found it helped me understand what was going on with Rory. It was a way of getting things out of my head. Rory watched a movie with me last week. It felt so good to have my brother back for a bit. I still worry about him, but things are getting better. Mum and Dad are happier, and Rory spends more time with us nowadays. His room is still messy, but I don't care, as long as I have my brother back. Even though I hate the eating disorder and what it did to my brother and family, we're all happier now. And I know Rory still has more work to do before he's fully better, but I know he can do it with our help.
Great. Okay. So I think that there's so much in that animation. I suppose what is, at the beginning, what strikes us is that sense that the eating disorder, when somebody develops an eating disorder, that they start to isolate themselves from the rest of the house, and that it starts to preoccupy their mind, that amount of preoccupation and distraction from everything else, alongside huge amounts of fear, worry, anxiety, causes all the normal habits within the house to change. And as we saw there, when the little sister, saw Rory being ill and she said, she's going to run and get mum, that's a completely normal thing to do. And suddenly when there's an eating disorder in the house, all the kind of normal things and typical things that we do suddenly trigger huge reactions and seem to be the wrong thing. You can hear the amount of upset on the part of the sister. You can hear how much refusal and fear is in her house. You can hear how she was feeling angry, she was feeling confused, and she was feeling afraid. And one of the things we do in one of our New Maudsley Carer skills groups is understanding the emotions that we feel when we have somebody that we love who has an eating disorder. And usually all of the feelings that the people in the house feel are exactly the same types of feelings that the person with the eating disorder feels, that they are feeling all of those things as well. It's just they have this other bit, this eating disorder, controlling them in their mind. What we see happening in the little sister is that she bursts out crying. So she's letting her feelings out, whereas Rory is doing something else. And because she's letting her feelings out, her parents take the cue to talk to her. And that's one of the things that we talk about in our pillar program, the importance of giving siblings the language to be able to have an idea in their head of what's going on. It doesn't have to be the word eating disorder. It can just be they have a problem and it makes it difficult for them to eat. But you give them the language so that they have a realistic idea of what's going on. So they're not imagining that something far worse is going on with their sibling. Another thing that we learned from the animation is that things get worse before they get better. When Rory goes into treatment, things don't actually start improving. And that would be very typical from everybody that we hear on our services, that with an eating disorder, it's not like other mental health problems. people usually don't want it fixed or don't want it to be gone. They find letting it go far worse than trying to keep it and make it work for them again. And so in that way, when the rest of the family is expecting everything to start getting better when the person goes into treatment, actually it gets more and more difficult. And we see that in our sibling animation. What we also see is that that idea of self-care, gaining knowledge, gaining insight, gaining skills when the parents, go to the pillar program or whatever it is, that is the very thing that makes an impact on how the sister feels in the house. That when the parents started to do stuff for themselves, that she felt that the house started to feel like a calmer place to be. And I suppose in it as well, it's the talking that relieves the really destructive symptoms. And what we hear at the very end when she says, I hate the eating disorder, it's that the eating disorder is thought of as an entity in itself. So the eating disorder is separate to Rory. And it in itself has a kind of identity within the family, and that makes it easier for all of the family to talk about it. So they're kind of the things that I pulled out of that animation as to why we put it together and why we hope that it's helpful for families to kind of have something to look at, have something to think about over and over again. But now I would really like to come to Colman. Colman, I would love it if you could share your thoughts and your experiences of what it's like within the house, within a family that might not just be in one house, obviously, supporting a person with an eating disorder.
Yeah, I mean, I really got a lot from watching the video, actually. And one of the things I was really interested in was when she said that takeaway night had become a source of stress rather than a source of joy. And our relationship with food as we grow up it's an emotional one. We come over the kitchen table Christmas time, and we have desserts and it's treat foods and all that sort of stuff. It's also, it can oftentimes be a source of a battleground, if you was trying to get a child to eat vegetables or whatever the case would be. So it's a kind of an emotive place to be, but it's usually somewhere collective where everyone kind of gathers around as a family. So if there's an atmosphere at the table, it has a ripple effect throughout the whole system, throughout the whole family. And so in the girls, Roy's sister finding, what used to be a very enjoyable takeaway night with pizza had become a source of stress. And I think that's one of the things that probably has struck me over the years, that the level of impact that it has on siblings, because meals are oftentimes 3 times a day. And if you throw in a couple of snacks in there, there's a lot of hours in the day that if there is battleground around food or there's stress around meal times, it has that impact on the whole family, on the whole unit. And many of the siblings are kind of carrying that a little bit, and they kind of are, and as I say, trying to understand it seems to be a real challenge, and the idea of, and I think I've heard this so many times, like, why do they not just eat, or why do they just stop exercising? And that sense of something, an intentionality to their difficulty, or they're just being difficult, or they're bringing a deliberateness of intention to what was a previously experienced good thing to now a bad thing. And that idea of blame is a real difficult dynamic to manage within the family, because for me, the person with the eating disorder it's to cope, control, and communicate. Those 3 functions are really important. And despite it having a kind of a communicative impact on the family and having a kind of oftentimes a very negative impact, it is about trying to communicate all is not well with me, and I need help, and I'm trying to control things as best I can. But if you don't have an understanding that the eating disorder is the kind of signpost to the problem as opposed to the problem itself, there isn't a tension that comes with that, and a blame and an anger and a frustration. And I think the other thing for many siblings is it's very hard to get angry with someone who's ill. The whole, even if you do start to understand that maybe this is something outside of their control or something that they can't manage, it's very hard to be annoyed that your life is being upset in that way or disrupted in that way, and you feel like maybe you're not compassionate enough if you get angry that meal times are stressful or plans have to be scratched because something has come up for your sibling who needs an appointment here, an appointment there. And the other thing is, in families we live in an attention economy, so there's only a certain amount of attention in the family unit, and everyone is vying for that attention. It's an arms race for attention within families. We're all trying to locate our own section of it, and when someone is ill, there's a need to invest quite a lot of that attention in that person. And there is a need on the others to kind of understand that. And I think that can be a big ask of children and young people, to understand that they may not be getting the attention that they otherwise would have had this not be the case. And it's a big ask for someone to understand and make sense of that. When small children are so obsessed with favoritism and your slice is bigger than mine and you got more than this, they see the world in a very kind of tangible way. And so if you're spending more time with my sister than you are with me, then that means you love your sister more than me. And I think that's a really difficult dynamic to manage, that in actual fact, it isn't that I love your sister more than you or your brother more than you right now. It's just they need this right now. And I always use the example of the Leaving Cert student. Your turn will come. We'll all be walking on eggshells and you won't have to do jobs when you're doing your Leaving Cert. But for now, your brother or your sister needs it. And so it's trying to understand that swings and roundabouts element of attention rather than measuring it in sound bites. But I've got a long way to tell you that I think that has a huge ripple effect within families. And sometimes that can be really hard to recover from, even when things are getting better. But I think the point of things getting worse before they get better, the idea that, how long will it take? Well, it depends. All of these they're all answers that children hate. Children and young people hate soon, later, maybe, perhaps. All these words are so indistinct. And when you're asking questions about a sibling who has an eating disorder, there's a lots of maybe, perhaps, later, we'll see. Which again, I think can cause even more anxiety when there's more unknowns. But massive ripple effects for everyone involved, and parents as well. I mean, hugely difficult to manage as a parent when you see that dynamic unplaying in front of your eyes, and oftentimes something you can't do an awful lot about in that moment, other than try and support everyone as best you can. But parents have a limited amount of energy and attention to give out, and sometimes I think they can be very harsh on themselves, feeling that they're not maybe doing that equally, but maybe it's more about equity than equality in those settings.
Yeah, I think that another really difficult thing, if we're thinking of the family and the parents as part of that, and I'm conscious that we have parents here who will be able to tell us what it's like, but there's something about the things that get the person, the kind of traits, like the type of person who is more vulnerable to developing an eating disorder, are things that are often valued within a family. So determination, putting your mind to something, even that kind of high achieving or perfectionist, and I don't want to be stereotypical, but the kind of things that really help somebody to have an eating disorder are also often the things that within the family unit are important to have, a functioning family. And that when that balance is tipped, so to speak, and you're talking about it, they're not choosing it, they're not doing it intentionally, but there's something about, but they're doing it at the same time. And there's something about that I think is very difficult for parents to take on board, the idea that the things that are keeping their person locked in the eating disorder are actually really great things, but they're double-edged swords. So it's great to be determined. It's great to be able to put their mind to things. It's great to be, to have goals and to go for it and all of those things. So I think that is also difficult within the family to manage.
Yeah, and I think it's oftentimes comes as out of the blue. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've parents say to me, "I've never had a problem with her up to this point," or "He's. I don't think I've ever raised my voice to this person before." And so, what pictures painted as oftentimes an internalizing child who or young person who's kind of managing things very independently. They're very driven. They're very, these are children who are kind of packing their school bags at 6 and 7 years of age and kind of ahead of themselves, which are, again, all these kind of prized characteristics. But if you place that drive, perfectionism, and that energy and focus into the negative, it becomes quite the opposite, and it becomes quite a challenge to try and I suppose to match the ferocity of those qualities, and in the same way, and I've often had parents say to me, if she could only flip her energy around, or he could flip his energy around to getting better, and unfortunately sometimes anorexia makes us a race to be sick as opposed to a race to be well. And again, that idea of sometimes the competitive nature, the driven nature, or all those qualities that you mentioned there, which are prized. I think in today's society as well, we look for people with drive and people who have focus and things like that. Not in the wrong hands, but again, there's an interesting idea of in the video, the mum takes the boy's watch, his obviously managing his steps and things like that, and any of those kind of wearables and smart devices, or even an app that's telling you how you're managing your diet, in the right hands of someone who's trying to maybe live a healthier lifestyle, that can be very useful prompt. But in the hands of someone vulnerable, that can become quite the persecutory device. And the idea around those things that make us vulnerable are oftentimes the things that make us hard to recover, because of that lack of self-worth or self-belief or self-value, which is compounded by eat less, move more good, move less, eat more bad, and that kind of controlled way in which we can see the world. And again, the drive behind that, coupled with that vulnerability, can be really, really difficult to manage for parents, families, and siblings.
Yeah, it can. Can I ask you one more question before we come to Ken and Maura? You mentioned there that the eating disorder is kind of a call for help, or was that the phrase you used? It was a way of communicating anyway, that they need something, or that they're not well, or they're struggling with something. And you said, we can get distracted by it. So we, if we only focus on the eating disorder stuff, we're kind of not seeing, well, what's driving it, what's going on that they need the help with. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of how you can manage that, to both acknowledge that the eating disorder in itself is communicating some kind of distress, and also that part of recovery is managing the eating disorder behaviors.
Yeah, and again, that's a kind of a difficult one to balance. I think the idea around, for me, the eating disorder is a kind of signpost to the problem. And oftentimes what we do is we kind of gather around the signpost. If I can humor you with an analogy of when my young lad was very small, I was feeding him one Saturday morning, and I was trying to get him to eat his breakfast, and he was up in the high chair. He wasn't verbal at the time, so he wasn't communicating with me, and I gave him the baby rice, and he started pushing it away, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's sick. So I got the thermometer, stuck it in the ear, no temperature, and I went, oh my gosh, and then I said, I'll get some toast, and I made buttery toast, and I tried to feed him that. He was pushing it away again. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm off to Crumlin or something, or else even worse, I might have to wake his mum. So from my view, then the third point, I got mushy Cocoa Pops, and I said, every child will eat Cocoa Pops. This is a full safe way of doing it. And he refused that as well. And I was getting stressed. And then I noticed he was looking over my shoulder, and there was this kind of Peppa Pig toy on the shelf behind me. And I reached for that and gave it to him. And he ate the baby rice, the toast, and the Cocoa Pops. And the issue was, the protest was not about the food. It was about, I need something. And for me, I got obsessed with, it's the food is the problem, but in actual fact, it's almost trying to find out what that Peppa Pig is that allows you to kind of address that need. And when you don't have words to say, I don't want this, I want that, food becomes a way of communicating protest, and it is effective. Most young people will say, nobody listened to me until I started to lose weight. Nobody listened to me until I started to get physically. And it does make us sit up and listen. You know, that's the centrality of eating. You know, if someone's not eating, it's a sign of something. And so, and I don't believe it to be a very conscious thing that people say, I'm going to do this. But I think it proves to be effective as a way of raising the flag that all is not well. And I don't know what that not well is, and I don't know how to fix it, and I don't know how to explain it, and I don't know how to communicate it, but I do need you to know that it's a struggle for me. And I think for me, that tends to be where I would see the food piece. However, even if I never found that Peppa Pig, I couldn't allow my child to eat nothing, you know, from the point of view of that there is a balance needed in terms of that. And, you know, and another, if I can entertain another analogy that I would use sometimes is, you know, if you have a child, let's say an infant again, who's maybe not verbal, and maybe they're eating something in a park, and let's say a bee lands on their sandwich and stings their mouth and they're sore and it swells up, and maybe for a day or two. But then when the swelling is gone, you're trying to get the child to eat, and they're refusing everything because they think everything has a bee in it. So I'm not going to drink water, I'm not going to have yogurt, I'm not going to have food. And although you can recognize that their fear is real, you can recognize that it's really painful for them, you can't let them not eat. You know, the idea was that you'd have to bribe or encourage or do everything you can to make sure that that child is okay. And that's the battle that parents have, is I want to acknowledge how terrified of this you are, but I also need to acknowledge that you need to have this. And so the idea around almost trying to say, I get this, I get the scaredness, I get the fear, I get the reality of it, and I get that it's real, but I also get that I have to challenge this, and I have to get you to do this in order to stay alive and to be well. And that's a real challenge. But I think if I explain it to myself in that way, it makes trying to support somebody to do what they don't want to do a little bit more, it makes more sense in my head for that, in that way, if that makes any sense.
It makes so much sense, Colman. Thank you. I'm sure everybody listening will get a lot from that. And I also think it makes sense, you know, if you've never had to reassure the kid, if it's always the mature one, the one who made their school lunch when they were 6, who never asked for anything, it makes it even harder then for you to have to be the one to recognize what's going on and you know, help them to eat.
And it's another point, it's oftentimes the child who's in the worst position in terms of asking for help is the child who knows the most. You know, the brightest kid in the class is the hardest one to put their hand up and say, I'm struggling. You know, if you have this impeccable record of doing everything perfectly, it's almost much harder to say, I'm struggling, I need some help. And so from the point of view of the courage in order to do that, or the difficulty in terms of hearing that, is made worse by the fact that they're oftentimes so impressive, you know.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. That makes so much sense. Yeah, thank you. So maybe we'll come to Ken and Maura now for a bit. Yeah. So maybe the two of you, it's great to have you both here. You know, it's great, and it's great to have you both at all of the groups that, you know, we run. And I'm really curious to see how you find it coming together and working together in that way. But maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about your situation and what you've been going through for the last few years, and you know, and what that experience has been like.
Sure, Harriet. Thanks for inviting us, and I just want to thank Colman for his Peppa Pig analogy. There was beautiful, it was really, really helpful. So thanks for that. But to get back to your question, anyway, you know, I guess just to paint a little bit of the picture, when, you know, this eating disorder came to our family, you know, it was overwhelming and, you know, a real panicky situation, and it was really difficult to know where to start. So I guess seeking help, and, you know, starting with the GP and the community services such as CAMS and so forth, and finding Bodywhys was a real revelation to us, you know, and the support of various clinicians, practitioners, but just trying to find support. And when you find support, the relief is absolutely huge. Support in any of these forms, you know, Jenny Langley and her Nima the Kent organisation were hugely helpful as well. And we attended a Malsey course at the weekend run by Caird Ireland, and Jill Todd presented to us, and it was just fantastic. So I think what I would say is that it was really panicky and overwhelming, but seeking help and support, was key. And I could say for myself anyway, I'm sure Maura had a completely different perspective, but I could say for myself that, the shared kind of group setting and supportive peers and supportive likes of Bodywhys, that it was an absolute revelation to me, the benefits of that. And as I say, I'm sure Maura sees it differently, but I think seeking support, asking for help, and being able to say yes, that I would like some help, it can be difficult, but difficult for me. The benefits though are huge. So that was my take so far.
Thanks, Ken.
I suppose we're on this road for a while. There's no quick fix, as we've discovered. I think your overall, isn't it, an eating disorder affects the whole family, and it really, really does. And the siblings, they're really put under pressure, and we all of us lack confidence. It knocks our confidence. It beats up on us, and we have this most amazing, beautiful daughter who, unfortunately, she never asked for it. She never went out to try and get this eating disorder. She has it. So it's all of our kind of intention is to help and support her, and to learn as much as possible about the eating disorder, what's out there, what's available. So that's where we are at the moment. It's very difficult to separate the eating disorder from the person. That takes a lot of time. That was one thing I suppose all of us individually struggled with, to accept that our person is here, and yet the eating disorder is there. And now, like, we can do it very, very, very easily now, but that's a lot of training from you guys, and even yesterday with the other support group, it was fantastic, and that's, as Ken said, it's people power, really, information, but yeah, it's education as well, and communication.
So for the people watching, how long about have you been having an eating disorder, living in your house?
10 years.
Okay.
10 years. Now, not always 10 years. At the start, it was very, very strong, obviously, and hospitalizations. And then there was, I won't say, it was always there. Except that our daughter could live as normal a life as possible. But unfortunately, I think COVID had a lot to play in a lot of young people's, and that really affected her. So I suppose for the last year and a half, 2 years, the eating disorder is extremely strong in our house at the moment.
So you have lived through that whole transition from child and adolescent services to adult services.
Yeah, that was quite challenging, I guess, Harriet. We've seen care in the community in inpatient care, and we've seen the adolescent care, and now adult care. And these transitions are very challenging. It's really obvious to us that there are a great many very committed and caring clinicians and professionals out there, and we've been lucky to be helped by a lot of them. However, they're completely under-resourced and understaffed and under pressure and overworked, and it is so obvious to us that the whole system needs more input, more resources, and more people. However, I guess we're just trying to make the best we can of the system that is there. And there were a great many challenges along the way. The whole issue of communication is absolutely huge. I suppose the issue of some kind of self-awareness for ourselves as to what we were doing, that's unhelpful. and what we're doing, what we can do that's helpful. You know, those areas were massive for us. And I guess, you know, there were some really amazing, I suppose, eye-opening moments, you know, just simple things like the kindness of others, you know, be that clinicians, be that professionals, be that carers, parents, and be that people suffering from eating disorders. Everyone is kind and everyone can be kind. And that the impact of that is huge. You know, just a kindness is just worth anything at times. It just has such an impact.
So what, you know, what would you say are the really like the most difficult parts of it for the two of you? What are the most difficult things to manage?
Well, our daughter is over, like she's moved into adulthood now, young adult. So I suppose she's a young adult. She has her own mind. It's her, that's what she wants to do. That's what we want her to do, you know. So there is a difficulty there. You know, I suppose it's hard for us to let her let go a little bit, you know, when we know she's unwell, yet she will find herself and she will find, you know, it will happen. It, you know, for us to stand back and you feel helpless. Yet you have to stand back. That's very difficult, I find. I find as well the issue of, you know, if I, you know, consent and, you know, I can't just ring up a doctor and say, how's X, you know, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And then I suppose I have to give her autonomy for her to do it anyway.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
I'm finding that just, you know, but I don't know. Yeah, that's difficult.
Yeah, I think if I could say maybe probably one of the most difficult things I had was, you know, a eating disorder tends to want to divide us and so forth, and staying together is quite difficult. You know, obviously we're different people, Maura and I. We see things differently, and kind of coming together, you know, despite the differing views, with an eating disorder in the house is really challenging. So, you know, just to understand that we do see things differently and we can still work together, you know, in a positive direction. It's really challenging, and that I suppose leads me on to communication, and maybe probably one of the keys is listening. And I don't think I'm a great listener, but I'm learning, you know, from the likes of yourself. So, you know, there's so much learning here. But certainly listening is a key for sure. And that was a really big challenge. And, you know, staying together and communicating with each other and with our kids, you know, they're really, they sound maybe like they should be easy to me, but they're not. They're really hard. And, you know, it has been a real awakening to realize what we can do and what we can achieve. So, you know, I guess it's strange to say there are perhaps some positives in this, that we have learned an awful lot about ourselves, about each other, and, you know, about maybe, you know, how to live our lives or whatever. It sounds a bit big, but that's the truth, you know.
It's really interesting for me, Ken, to hear you say that, because I suppose what I've seen you regularly on the supports since COVID, and my impression would be that the two of you are always there together and you're really united. So I think it's wonderful that you're able to say that's been the biggest learning, is how to unite together. So, you know, because it is so important. Eating disorders love to divide and conquer. They love it when dad thinks one thing and mum thinks another thing, and they love it when you don't agree and it can just take over. So what do you feel then? I suppose what I'm hearing in that is that by you two kind of doing work for yourselves, that the knock-on effect is that it might have made things in the house a little bit easier for your daughter with the eating disorder and her sibling maybe. But that's just my impression. You know, what do you actually think has helped? Because you're in a very difficult situation. You've been dealing with it for a very, very long time. You have had different treatments that haven't necessarily proved successful yet. What do you think are really beneficial things for other families to think about?
I think maybe you touched on it there, Harriet. Self-care is actually much bigger than it sounds. It really is. You know, this weekend we travelled together. We left our kids at home and we went and we feel looked after ourselves and connected with some family, as well as learned some eating disorder stuff. And those kind of actions, you know, taking a holiday, taking a break, whatever it is, whatever does it for you, just that kind of self-care is really, really significant for all the family members who haven't eating disorder, I guess, in particular. You know, that it's not all about eating disorders, or taking the focus away from it and going and doing something for yourself is really, really important and really difficult, because you get really isolated at times, you know, and really overwhelmed, and it can be very difficult to make those decisions. In fact, I can tell you it is really difficult to make those decisions. However, the dividend is just huge. You know, I'm sure Maura will tell you in a different way, but I think it's huge.
And what is the dividend for you, Ken?
I think the dividend is to be able to deal with the stressful situations and, you know, the eating disorder scenarios, I suppose the situation that arrived for myself and Maura and with our other daughter, that we can deal with those situations in family life and in work and in any other friendship, relationships or whatever, that we can deal with them in a much different light. You would just the lens has changed and you just see things differently with a lot more positivity and a lot more hope. So it just revitalizes the whole system, I find.
Lovely. I suppose, again, you're role modeling the change you want to see in the other person, because you want them to be able to look after themselves as well.
For
But you've
sure.
heard me say that 1,000 times. Maura, what about you?
I suppose the people we've met amazing people along the road. And like some of them will put their hands up and say, I'm not an eating disorder expert, you know, trying to find the actual, you know, people in that place, but we have met so many good people along the way. That really helps. As I say, the group, you know, the learning from yourselves and yesterday's course as well, that, you know, that was really helpful as well. I suppose family, our extended families are fantastic, you know, they're very supportful. We all get it wrong at times, we all say the wrong thing, they do, we do, whatever, so we're all learning in this, we're all learning, you know, so that's but yeah, it's yeah, no, I think that's probably a lot of it at the moment.
So maybe I'll just tell people a little bit about, you know, that Colman, did you want to say something?
Sorry, yeah. Do you mind if I jump in there? There's just something that just both Maura and Ken hit on a really important point there. And the idea of the eating disorder expert is a bit like a unicorn. I'm not so sure they exist, and I mean that in the best possible way, because all the difficulties that you describe happen with even the best teams in the world. So I've worked in at least 7 inpatient units. Many would be kind of top, Great Ormond Street, Edinburgh, all these sorts of places. Although there might be a unified front, like Harriet said, you know, you both present yourselves as very clear. The discussions behind closed doors around dealing with young people with eating disorders are hugely complex. And the most difficult thing to do in this situation is trying to separate what is unwilling and what is unable. And that's a really challenge, because, you know, we will kind of be a bit firmer with unwilling, and we will be more supportive with unable. And every moment of every day, with every mealtime and every snack, you're faced with the dilemma of which is this, you know. And one might think, I think she's unable today, and I'm going to go with the supportive one. And I think she's a bit unwilling today, I'm going to go with a kind of more directive approach, or whatever it might be. And the idea of the friction that causes, even in terms of, like, there's something about eating disorder that almost makes us be really rigid in response, because it's so rigid. So we mirror that and saying, you know, you have to finish those 3 Ps. And, you know, even though calorifically, we know it doesn't make sense, and then some people say, well, just leave it off. And other people say, no, we have to finish it out. And so the idea around, there's never a unified, there's only a negotiation, and even within the treating teams, there's always negotiation. It's always about, where do we go here? And oftentimes it is trying to respond to that consensus of that given moment, rather than it being something that's pre-planned or whatever the case is. But the fact that it would cause rifts amongst people in terms of what the right thing to do is, I don't think there's any person who deals with eating disorder, whether it be parent, team, nursing team, multidisciplinary team, that don't have those discussions time and time and time again. And I would probably offer you some reassurance in that, but also the kind of sense that it's difficult. Like, it's really, really challenging, and there isn't a kind of a one way to do it. There's oftentimes just a way to navigate it, and it is about changing direction, trying to moving course, adjusting boundaries, doing these things as best we can given the circumstances. So that struggle is real, and even for someone who's been working in this area for 25 years, you still have that struggle. So I hope that offers you some consolation as to how challenging it is. But Ken's point about self-care and being able to communicate amongst yourselves and being able to kind of work out, let's not make any unilateral decisions. Let's make it together. Let's try and work this out. Let's try and that's the labor involved in it. But it does pay dividend, because if you're comfortable in what you're doing, or it's the best option that you have available to you, that will feel more containing for the young person, even though it may not feel like the right thing in the moment. And the idea is, and I'll give you an example of sometimes we make a decision on a quiet life, so somebody wants to insist on somebody finishing something, and somebody's saying, oh, let's just leave it be, or whatever the case may be. And the idea of, what does that message send? Well, it oftentimes sends a message that I don't think you need this, in terms of the finishing it out, or, so even though you might be getting a quiet life in that moment, you might, and again, this is the idea of kind of separating the eating disorder from the person. If I'm telling the person you've done enough, I'm going to reward you with kind of letting off, what message does the eating disorder pick up? They may pick up a very different one. And so you're trying to negotiate, how will this intervention, communication, sentence be heard by both people? One will be, thanks very much, ma'am, you're great. And one will be, they don't think you need this, you need to cut down. And so that dilemma and that challenge is difficult. And I think to struggle with it would be to be human. I'm going to stop there, but it's tough. It's a tough one.
And isn't that one of the really frightening things about when you suddenly are thrown into the world of an eating disorder, that you expect that the experts, or the people who have been doing this for 25 years, you expect that they know what will work and what you should do. And so you kind of put your faith in them. And then if it doesn't, it feels like you've been let down. It feels like either you've been blamed as a parent because you haven't done it the right way, or you lose absolute faith then in the clinicians that they know what they're doing. So it's a very frightening place, isn't it, for families to be suddenly in as well.
Hugely so. And I think what works for one might not work for everyone. And there needs to be a degree of tailoring it to meet the needs of people who are more able to kind of manage communication and language, whereas others might struggle really with that, and it might need a different approach. It is a tailored approach in many ways. There's principles that we understand, but the style of how it's delivered it has to be kind of a little bit more creative than that. And there's no kind of one approach. It's certainly not uniform.
Yeah. It's one of the helpful things about the supports that we provide for families, because anybody can go to them. It doesn't matter what situation you're in. I mean, you guys know we have people who have young kids who are just diagnosed. We have people who are longer. We have people in all different situations with all different eating disorders. And it's actually about kind of helping train parents to be able to hold the contained space. It's actually about giving them confidence to be able to manage that space and be able to support, you know, their person, their loved one, be able to support that person no matter what is going on, and be able to kind of unite together in the family to be able to provide that safety net where the person can feel not necessarily pressurized, but supported. So it's really helpful, you know, it's been really, really helpful to provide those supports.
And I suppose from our point of view, as the parents, well, I'll speak for myself, that it definitely, I've learned so much, you know, the open question, all of the tools. Now it's difficult to implement, to put the tools into action at times, but you have them there. And you just, I suppose, the more you hear things, the more it'll sink in, and the more experience you have with this, and you know, and now there is like relationships have got stronger between all of us because of, well, we're probably just a small family anyway, you know, and we've a good relationship, but you know, it like it's not nice having an eating disorder in the house, you know, and there's a lot of worry and concern and everything, you know. There are other non-eating disorder things to do as well. Besides that, and kind of concentrate on a lot of non-eating disorder stuff.
Yeah.
I think one really important message, Harriet, sorry to interrupt you. It's kind of Stephen Maura's told really, but Maura has often said over the years that, you know, she knows her daughter, we know our child. And I must admit, I've eventually managed to hear her. She's so right, you know, it's really true. And I think Colman referred to it there, you know, that oftentimes, and you referred to it, oftentimes professionals, we expect you have all the answers, you know everything, and we really are uninformed. And that is just not the case. And it's really important to remember it. And thankfully, Maura does always get that. And it is just a really important message every year, you know. And the only other thing I think Colman hit on there was rigidity. And I think you're looking at the epitome of it here. And I always have to remind myself that it is a kind of a fatal flaw, you know, with a smile, and just say, well, that's the way it is, but at least I know it and I can protect myself from it. So just those two things. Anyway, thanks, Harry.
Insight's the first step, Ken. There's nothing to say.
For sure, Colman. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-awareness. If you're not aware of these things in yourself, then, you know, how can you ever begin to think about them? Yeah, absolutely.
Could I just jump in again? Sorry. There's one thing Maura said about the non-eating disorder things being important. And that's crucially important. And again, what I'd say to you is, if you can imagine that when the eating disorder happens, the kind of 90% of that person's thinking time is about food, weight, shape, you know, and there's 10%, even 5% or whatever's left of their lives. And when we make our obsession about food, weight, and shape all there is as well, we just continue to keep that balance. You know, sometimes it's not about reducing the 90%, it's actually about increasing the 10, you know, finding that person who was or is there and trying to, and that can be very difficult to do when it's so consumed. But if there's time to do non-eating disorders things, if there's time to enjoy, because what you want to do is if your daughter's name is Harriet, you know, you want to increase the Harrietisms as opposed to kind of just about reducing the eating disorder isms. And that's a two-way process. It is about investing in the person to be resilient enough to defend themselves against the eating disorder, rather than just trying to unpick the eating disorder all the time. And I think sometimes in focus, we become so symptom focused that we forget the person, you know. And sometimes, you know, that it's Patch Adams said, you know, you can treat a symptom, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but if you treat a person, you win every time. And there's something about, you know, being able to access the non-eating disorder part and keeping that the supply of life to that as open as possible. Although maybe not valued in the early stages, it is something that absolutely I think should be a focus of all families, really, is to, you know, and the one thing, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in again. You know, one thing that young people don't like you to say is, you know, all we want is the old Harriet back. You know, almost the old Harriet was the reason why I got into this mess in the first time. But it is about this new version of yourself that has better self-belief, better self-worth. So it is about the person, although not always the historical one who almost engaged in this difficulty in the first instance, but almost you need to help them to become who they want to be, as opposed to necessarily returning to who they were, if that makes any sense.
We have a podcast released this week talking about a father's experience of supporting his daughter in college. You know, she developed an eating disorder, but just related to the non-eating disorder parts of her life. And he told this really helpful story where after kind of a couple of crises and everything, she was back at college, she was living on her own, and he would call her every day. And they made a decision that 1 out of the 7 phone calls would be about the eating disorder, and all of the other phone calls would be about other stuff. And that was really because I think that somebody had said it, and he was going to a MODSI group during this time, and I think someone had come in and said it in the group that a person who has an eating disorder, that when you were always waiting for it on every phone call, you know, when they were in college, they were always waiting for that last bit of the phone call where their mum or their dad would then go to the eating disorder, and it made it really difficult for them to have a normal conversation on the phone. And so if it was agreed that one of the phone calls would be about the eating disorder, then they could relax and just chat on all of the other phone calls. So it is about having the eating disorder in its place, and that it's not seeping into every aspect of your work. And that comes up in Pillar a lot, that, you know, you hear that every conversation a mom might have with her daughter or her son will be about the eating disorder in some way. And they can't understand why they're saying, stop, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And really it's because the conversation is just about the eating disorder, and they're really defensive about it and really resistant. So it is important to be able to say, okay, look, I hear you. I'm not going to talk to you about it for this amount of time. I can't promise you I'll never talk to you about it again, but to have that space away from the eating disorder. Does that make sense?
Definitely, definitely.
I think my mother should have done the Pillar problem because I lived in London, and she opened every sentence with, "Are you eating and are you going to mass?" There were the 2 questions that I got asked.
And did you ever tell her to stop asking you?
I think she gave up on it after a while, but she realized the answers were getting more vague every time I was trying to answer them. So
yeah. So will we have a look at a couple of questions then? Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to read them, Harriet, or?
I don't mind, Barry. Will I read them? Will I read this first one anyway?
okay.
So this person says, this week couldn't have come at a better time for me. Thank you. Recently found out our 16-year-old daughter has an issue, massive weight loss, and keeping a diary of a diet for over 7 months. How or when is it possible to get her to admit that there is a problem? We know, as does the doctor, there's a problem, but daughter, although begrudgingly willing to go to the doctor, is not admitting anything is wrong. What would you say to that, Colman?
Yeah, I mean, I think the opening part of that is almost acknowledging the allure of the eating disorder. I think that's a really important opening with that, in terms of it does, in the short term, probably make things much more controllable, much more neater. You know, if you were offered a contract to, you know, I'll make you more confident, I'll make you worry less, I'll have less overwhelmed, and you'll feel more in control of your life, most of us would sign that. And in the first instance, there's a great deal of benefit in that. It's over time that the contract that you signed comes back to bite you, and it says, like, no, you can't move away from this because you signed the contract. You have to keep doing it. You have to keep. And so what starts out as a kind of a life coach becomes a kind of a drill sergeant and a boot camp drill sergeant at that. And so there's a point at which the eating disorder moves from being an ally to now being quite a persecutor. And the acknowledgement of it being an ally in the first instance, and acknowledging how anyone could be seduced by it is an understanding part. If you're going, eating sort of bad, you're foolish, then people will become more protective of it and they'll try and defend against it and say it's not that. Whereas if you're saying, if you're overwhelmed, if you're finding things really difficult and you turn to this as a means of making things better in the short term, I understand that. I get how that might happen. I get how that could happen. But what is happening is this is evolving from the life coach to the drill sergeant now, and you need help to support you to kind of to defend against that. And it's almost that the offer of help is to support the person to find their own voice against this version, rather than we're going to take this from you. The fear is you're going to make me, the fear is eating, gaining weight. And if you're saying treatment is making you eat and make you gain weight, there's an understandable reluctance to engage in treatment. Treatment is a much broader issue than that. Treatment is about trying to understand why this happened and help you to manage that feeling better, and trying to kind of build up your own sense of who you are to try and defend against it. But it is really important how you sell the idea of recovery. If recovery is about food, weight and shape and nothing else, it becomes something that I think a lot of people would kind of defend against or buck against or dig their heels in against. It has to be about selling it for their benefit as opposed to for yours, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I would also say that, simply the eating disorder is a coping mechanism. It's a coping strategy. A person does it because it helps them to feel better. So they're not going to willingly say it's a problem, and that we expect resistance. We expect them to have a really hard time acknowledging that what they're doing is not okay, and don't let it deter you from keeping on going, with the doctor and everything, but just maybe, to try to accept that she's going to see it differently. She's going to find it really difficult to be aligned with you and to agree with you, and you can't let that stop you. And you can't let that, you can't need her to acknowledge there's a problem before you start on the process of trying to get her help. As in the Mudsie, they say you roll with resistance, and that's just the way you have to go. Ken or Maura, would you have any thoughts on that idea of, somebody acknowledging that they have a problem?
I guess I never focused too much on the concept of you must acknowledge that you have an eating disorder. Like, I think I can go more with Colman's approach that, well, what does it mean, and what have I been told here, rather than you have a problem, you must admit it. It never really, well, I never found it very helpful anyway to take that approach. More what's really going on. I still haven't figured it out, but one of these days.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a good bit into treatment before someone recognizes that there was a problem in the first instance. Do you know what I mean? In terms of they may feel a lot of what you do in the early stages are surplus to requirements and unnecessary and a mountain and a molehill and all that sort of stuff. And it's only in hindsight that they kind of would see, actually, that was bad. I didn't see it at the time. And so again, I think that rolling with resistance, and it isn't always about full engagement before you start process. Sometimes you have to have process to create realization, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. The same mother also asks, should she let the transition year tutor know about her concerns ahead of a school trip abroad? We don't want her to stop going, but ... So I suppose I would think, if you're worried about her, if it was something else, would you let the tutor know?
I think when it comes to anything in terms of knowledge and resources, you're better off looking at it than for it, if that makes sense. But again, I understand the confidentiality issue if your daughter doesn't want that to be the case. from the safety point of view, if there are concerns around weight loss and eating and everything else, that might inform the person to support them rather than maybe get on their case, which might have an opposite effect. But I'd really try and get your daughter on side to agree to that being said, in terms of what level of information that your daughter's comfortable with that person knowing. I think there's enough kind of deceit and secretiveness that goes on with eating disorder without adding to it by further layers. But it would, and maybe it's one of those things that in order for you to go and feel safe, I need this to be the case, and so I need someone to know who will be there to help you. And you're not prohibiting somebody from having a very positive corrective emotional experience, but you're saying there are things in place that I would need in order to feel safe about that happening. Yeah.
Maura, I see you nodding your head there.
Yeah, definitely. I think the collaborative approach there is really important. Openness as much as possible. There's an awful lot of secrecy. So I think as much as possible openness, and 16 is a young lady.
And very few people get annoyed by being told too much information. They tend to get annoyed by not being told enough. Yeah.
That's true. Hadn't thought about it like that. Okay, so there's a question for you, Colman. It says, "Hi, Colman. My daughter was diagnosed at 13. She's now 16 and doing so well. It's been a long road. We've learned so much along the way. She's now ready to do psychotherapy, but I'm finding it difficult to find someone." So I suppose that's about trying to find a good psychotherapist.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a really kind of a grim situation in terms of trying to access services. And it's not a COVID problem. It was difficult before that, but it has been made 100 times worse over the last number of years. In terms of just the demand for services, far outweighs. It's back to what Ken said in terms of what is available. And I could easily give 5 or 6 names, but you'd be ringing them and they'd all be telling their lists are full. The issue is that, and that's a reality, that the services are not there to match the need. That's not to say that it wouldn't be hugely helpful if you can get the right therapist and the right support in terms of, if maybe somebody is ready to engage in that now and maybe wasn't able to do that before. It could be really important to try and access that. But it's almost, and I hate to sound grim, but it is a kind of a rabbit out of a hat issue that sometimes there is an inevitable waiting time for that individual work to take place. We need to invest hugely in that, in terms of as a nation who has any sort of investment in the mental health of our population. But as of yet, we don't have that level of investment, and so it is. Unfortunately, it makes for a grim answer. Absolutely required, absolutely necessary, but you may absolutely have to wait to get that, if that makes any sense. My apologies for being the bearer of bad news on that one.
And we have a comment here, just reiterating that parents should trust their instincts, that they know their child best, and that parents should be fully informed. And there's a link to the Feast organization, which I think lots of parents find very helpful. So Barry, you might put that in the notes there. Somebody else comments that it is a really good thing to say, not getting back to the old me, but the new me and the person I want to be. Thank you so much for saying this. Yeah, so I'm trying to recover, but stuck, like not being able to let go of my eating disorder and stick to not restricting. Any help would be appreciated, and also how to help my husband and my 15-year-old daughter. So that I think that reading that's a mom who has an eating disorder.
Can we have a go at that one?
Yeah, have some. Do you have some thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think recovery is a movable object, in terms of sometimes we'll feel more recovered than others, and sometimes we get to a level where it isn't grossly impacting on our functioning, but we're not pushing past that, and so we're almost holding on to a degree of eating disorder just to almost hold on to some control in terms of that. But it's and again, you're kind of stuck on that cusp, and sometimes the resistance to get better is not so much an unwillingness, but a fear of letting go of the final bit. And if I can bother you with another metaphor, I work with children, so tend to working with metaphor seems to work well for me. But it's almost like if you're floating in the ocean and you're kind of feeling overwhelmed and you're flapping for your life, and a life buoy comes and you hold on to it, it stabilizes everything and it's all very well and it's all fine. And then somebody comes along on a boat and says, come up here and we'll bring you to the shore. And as you're getting onto the boat, you're holding onto the life ring. And they say, oh, no, you can't take that with you. You have to throw that back in. And you go, hang on a second. This is the thing that helped me. This is the thing that helped me stabilize everything. I can't let go of this. And then say, well, you can't get on the boat unless you do. So you go, actually, I'm fine. I'll just hang on here. So you jump back into the water and bob around. And what you don't realize over time is the thing that you think is saving you is the thing that's drowning you, if that makes any sense. And so, but the idea of making this distinction where you have to get rid of that before you do this, it's almost like, we'll bring it onto the boat and we'll go in, and over the time, it'll become much more of a hindrance than a help, and you'll want to surrender it yourself, if that makes any sense, as you go into that. But that resistance to kind of get to the next phase or move on is oftentimes a fear of being without something. It almost is, it will change who I am. I will lose my identity. I will lose those bits. And the idea around clinging on to something that helped isn't a resistance to you. It's a fear of what the possibility might be. And it's almost about maybe not trying to prize it from their arms, but almost trying to introduce a position where it becomes much more of a hindrance, than a help, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I need to add that bit of the story onto my story about a person falling into the river and grabbing a branch that maybe some people know. Ken and Maura have heard it many, many times. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So we're just coming, we've got 15 minutes left and there's a good few questions. So I'm just going to go a little bit quicker if that's okay.
Sorry, yeah.
So Anne asks, so her person is in hospital and it's all very new to her. Phone calls, they're living far away, so they're having phone calls, and their person is really not happy to talk about the eating disorder in conversation. She's asking, should they do what I was saying about having one call related to the eating disorder or not? And what I would say about that is that we can't tell you whether that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but to try and frame it as an experiment. So try it and see, does it work out okay? If it works out okay, then keep doing it. If it doesn't work out, then try something else. That you have to experiment with these things. Yeah. Would you, Ken and Maura, would you agree with that idea?
Absolutely. We've tried so many things that haven't worked. So, and then you try, you stop, you change it. So yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good idea.
Okay. Another question. My 16-year-old daughter is 3 years into recovery. We got her help at 13 and she spent 8 weeks in hospital, which I think saved her life. Then the hard work began for us as we had to get to know anorexia in order to help our daughter. It has been the most difficult 3 years of our lives, but we're coming out the other side. She recently asked us if she could join the gym, not to lose weight, but for her head. We were scared. She is so much happier. Are we doing the right thing? Colman, I'm interested to know how you would answer this, because I know how I answer it, but
yeah,
okay.
I'm not so sure it might be the same as you. I mean, again, I think 3 years in and that you've had that distance. Food is one of those relationships where we have a complex relationship with, we can't not do it. So it's not like I'm never going to gamble anymore. I'm not going to drink alcohol. Food has to be an exercise, has to be an ongoing role in our lives for the next amount of time. And so engaging in some healthy movement is something that should be encouraged in that way. But again, it is a source of anxiety because it may be a route back to something where they might slip into. But I would try and see if I could allow that person to try and manage that relationship safely. And again, this is a bit more in Ken we're saying about stepping back. You know, the idea of, you know, if we don't want to stop something that's working, or we don't want to, you know, be the reason why, you know, something goes wrong. But there's something about positive risk taking in terms of that there's a potential benefit in this girl. If she's saying, I want to clear my head, you know, there's lots of suggestion that exercises in the right amounts and the right way is good for that. And just, I suppose, observing from a distance how that relationship with exercise is going, but anxiously allowing it would be my shout on that one. Is that the same as you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Thanks.
think it's a, could I say something, Harry, on that?
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think that whole space of kind of motivation, and, you know, that this person, they want to have some exercise in their life, they want to have the gym in their life, and that, you know, it's really frightening, it's scary, it's risky, and there's a knee jerk is, are you mad? However, we found that that kind of risk taking and retaining and keeping hold of that motivation is really important. So if that's an important thing to that person, then I guess it's important in my view to take the risk. Everyone will form their own view, you know. So just what might work for us may not work for others. But certainly punishment and coercion are words that are not in my vocabulary anyway. They don't fit in this space as far as I can see, even though they may be still there in some quarters. But that's what I would say.
Yeah, you're so right. And you make me think of the idea of, you know, it's about becoming an expert at your person's eating disorder. So, you know, you won't know whether going to the gym is okay until they try it. And you don't have to be all or nothing about it. You know, you don't have to fall into that trap of being rigid about it either. Yeah. Okay, so next question is, I would appreciate Colman's view on siblings aged 10 and 14 years, joining family sessions in an inpatient unit. Siblings say they don't want to go, and I know they feel very loyal to their sister. They don't want to make her feel bad, etc. And I have some concern as to how much support the unit can give the siblings in their own right. Thus, they are being brought in for their needs. Are they being brought in for their needs or just their sisters? And thus we risk them being opened up without continuation of care or support for them as siblings. Sorry, I forgot I need glasses now to read. Yeah, so basically unsure whether to bring siblings into family sessions. Are they just being brought in for their sister? They obviously want to help their sister, but mum is obviously concerned for their own well-being at doing that.
Yeah, and I can understand that risk. I mean, I think if chances are parents have been in family therapy already, so they'll have a sense of what it's like in there in terms of if it is a little bit confrontational or something, that they might be alerted to that. My suggestion would be that those siblings have a session on their own without their sister and see what it's like and have a feel for what kind of questions, because sometimes the therapy is much more about the fear of what it could be like rather than what it is like. And so the anxiety might be kind of the lens with which they understand that to be. It's, you know, standing up and saying, my name's Colman, I am, you know, there's a kind of a fear that that's the case. It oftentimes won't be. But I would allow them to come in and meet the family therapist, have a session with them first, and then make a decision on whether they wanted to proceed with that as a means of helping their sister. I wouldn't think that the motivation is to kind of just provoke. I would hope it isn't. It's more to kind of get an insight into what the family life is like and how those siblings would be better informed to be either less affected by the impact of their sister's illness or in a better position to help her to kind of better understand it. But again, family therapy is it's a Marmite experience. Some people really get an awful lot from it, other people don't. It's not one of those things where I could say, yeah, it's great, or no, it's not. It really depends on how it's done.
Okay, thanks. The next question is kind of tricky. It's quite like individualized, but it actually does come up in a different way. So I'll read it. The therapist that is helping my daughter, who's 16 and has an eating disorder, has been very critical of of me as a mother in a private meeting I had with him. He compromised his professionalism and started shouting at me that I've been doing a bad job with her. My daughter, though, who doesn't know of the incident, wants to keep on seeing him. How do I balance between her need to keep seeing him and his criticisms towards me as a mum? And I suppose I'm thinking of situations that come up where there is a split between who's treating and a parent. So I don't know whether you have any comments.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like the greatest experience in terms of professionalism and that sort of thing. I mean, again, nobody should be shouted at or screamed at in any way, shape, or form in terms of in the vulnerable position of looking for help. I suppose what I would say is the child is she under 18?
She's 16.
16. Again, your parental right is to make a call on whether you believe someone to be a safe influence or not. And again, that would be your call because she is a minor. In terms of certainly as a parent myself, I would want to be comfortable with the person who I think is delivering treatment to a child of mine. So again, it might be about having another conversation with that person about it. But yeah, again, find out what she finds helpful about that situation as well. Sometimes like anything, therapy can give us what we want, but it isn't giving us what we need. That sometimes can feel a little bit easy, but it's not necessarily productive. But I certainly wouldn't think that's a very good indicator of that person's professional decorum if he ended up shouting at you. So maybe look into that a little bit further. I would have, that would raise a red flag for me, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Thank you. My 20-year-old son 2 months ago came out having bulimia. He's been to the GP and engaged with a therapist last week. So he's 22, that's 2 months ago. I feel conversation is heightened around calories, etc. And when he overeats, I play it down. Not sure what to do. My anxiety is very high, but I'm not showing it. One great positive is we're spending more time together.
Yeah, I mean, it's very early days. He's only been to one session. And again, similar to the animation video that you showed earlier, sometimes it can get worse before it gets better, especially in the early parts of treatment, where there may be challenges to kind of manage the binge purge cycle a little bit, or to try and reduce it, which could develop into more stress. I think what the big plus here is that you have an open relationship with your child and son, and they're able to tell you about their experiences of what they're struggling with, and again, maybe sharing more time with you is a really good way in terms of trying to help them to better understand the difficulties they're having at the moment. But I would manage your expectations. Bulimia sometimes can be a slow one to get really responsive in terms of seeing symptom reduction and things like that. So after one session, I don't think you could make a call on that. But the fact that that person is open and approachable to you and finds you approachable to them, that's a big plus. I'd be trying to maintain that as best I can, to be honest.
And we have time for maybe one quick question with a minute or so at the answer, because we're coming up.
Right.
No, you're fine. It's 26 minutes past 3. So it's a person with a 15+ year history of anorexia. Suggestions for changing the mindset. I'm on its side, so that they're on the eating disorder side. Any kind of thoughts on?
That's the one you gave me a minute for. Yeah, again,
the person who asked that question.
I think the issue there is, I mean, again, the it side versus your side. And I think it's really important to try and challenge the voice of the it. There's so many promises of it'll be this, it'll be that, this is good, this is bad. It's a really convenient way to live our lives, thinking if I move more and eat less, I'm a good person. And if I eat more and move less, I'm a bad person. It just doesn't reflect real life. And the reality is that you have to challenge that rigidity, as no matter how smooth, and it's kind of cops and robbers, goodies and baddies. Life isn't like that. It's much more in the gray. And it is not always right, and you're not always right, but somewhere in that middle is probably where the truth is. So again, it is about challenging it, trying to work back to any certainty, because, you know, as soon as you hear something you believe is a gospel, question it, because it tends to be somewhere in the middle rather than an absolute.
Absolutely. It's so difficult, isn't it? Just eating disorder, especially after that length of time, it really just, you know, influences the whole world. It's very, very difficult. Okay, well, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Ken and to Maura for coming today and for being with us and sharing your experiences and, you know, what you found helpful and how you've managed to come together and be on the same page and work together. It's been absolutely lovely hearing you speak. And Colman, thank you so much for your insights and your metaphors and your stories. They will go into the back of my head. I will be using them with your permission, obviously.
Work away.
Been so interesting talking to you all. We really, really appreciate it. And it's been a wonderful event to start Eating Disorders Awareness Week 2023. So thank you so much for today.
Thanks, Harriet.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you tomorrow. See you, Ken.
Bye.